I just
Sure.
and then we could start.
Yeah.
Oof.
So as we're waiting to start, I can see some familiar names. I haven't seen any familiar faces yet. So to those people who I know, delighted that you're here. Very nice to see you again.
Yes, I think now most people are pretty much in, and as they come in, we'll let them into the meeting.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's great to have so many people join us today. Hi, everybody. I'm Sonali. I'm a writer and curator based in Mumbai. Very quickly, I'm going to introduce BICAR, the Bombay Institute for Critical Analysis and Research. We are a non-profit pedagogical and research para-academy. Founded in 2019, we promote critical thinking, teaching, research methods, reading, and writing in the humanities and social sciences, overlooked or beyond the scope of existing university discourse. We tune our curriculum to critical philosophy, visual culture, architecture, sound, the performing arts, and design, producing a relationship between intellectual inquiry and social, political, and aesthetic transformation, a lot of which is going to be about the conversations that we'll have today. Once I think we have more people coming in. Also, I would like to introduce Rico Franses, who will be giving us this talk, more of a question and answer session today, who is the chair of critical analysis of art here at BICAR. He was for many years the founding director of the University Art Galleries and Collections at the American University of Beirut. He has also held teaching positions at the Australian National University in Canberra, Pratt Institute in New York, and a fellowship at Harvard University. There's much more to be said, but we have a short time together, so I think we should just get started. Rico, do you want to start?
I do. Just before we start, though, can I ask you to turn on your camera, Sonali? I find it, I need, and if there are another one or two people who want to turn on your camera so that I can see someone who I'm speaking to, it's actually
my camera is on. Rico, can you see me? And also everybody else, if y'all can turn on your camera, if your bandwidth or internet permits it, like please do it just to make this more interactive. But Rico, can you see me? I think my camera is
I cannot see you. Something strange is happening.
So maybe you have to look in your screen and where invites or participants are there and like open it.
Okay, participants.
Because there are a few of us here with our camera on, so.
That's funny, but I'm not seeing you. So I've got the list of people, you know, and there are where there would usually, and some people's pictures, but I'm not seeing anybody live on. Can you see me, by the way? Let's put it that way.
I can see you.
Okay, so okay, so let's not, you'll probably show up at some point. Okay. So, all right, so I'll start anyway. Perhaps, Sonali, are you sharing the screen at the moment?
Yes, maybe that's why you can't. But even
can you?
Kunal is here, Amita is, can you see other people's screen? I mean, see other people's window.
I can see a window, but no faces. So can you just stop the screen share for a second while as I'm beginning to talk? There we go. Now I can see. That's it.
Okay, we can go ahead this way.
Yeah, actually, that's great. And then in a little while, I'll ask you to do the screen share again once we get going. So great. So this conversation started. I was talking to Sonali just a few days ago. We were talking about some of the courses that I give, and we were getting into a general discussion about the courses that I teach and the way I teach. And so this is I'm doing a course with BICAR in 2 days' time. We're starting a course on Buddhist art. So this started as a discussion in relation to Buddhist art, the course that we're going to be doing. And I find myself as an art historian, so I've been doing this a long time. I've been teaching art history a long time. And I cover a lot of ground, right? So I do contemporary art and I do modern art, but really I also do a lot of ancient art. So, you know, the older it is, the better as far as I'm concerned. Everything from, as I say, Buddhist art to ancient Egyptian art to, you know, to ancient medieval art. I love it all. And I'm always confronted when I'm speaking with people and they say, what do you do and what are you doing? And then I say, well, I teach. Oh, what do you teach? If I say I'm doing modern and contemporary, everybody sits up and listens. Oh, that's great. Yeah, that sounds really great. But then as soon as I say, and I also do ancient medieval, or, you know, if art is 2000 years old, then I really love it. And then I suddenly see this sort of glazed look coming over people's eyes, right? And I'm always amazed by that because I always find the art to be incredible. I find it spectacular stuff. And I'm find myself asking the question, why is it that people, oh, and you know, and then I ask about it, and then people always say, oh, old stuff is boring, right? Even people who love art, they say art of now is what's really interesting, but the old stuff is just not that interesting. It's just not. I don't feel that it speaks to me. I don't feel that it addresses me. And so that's the question that I want to talk about now. So this is the history, as we're saying, the history and the history of art. So that's the first proposition that I want to say. Now, there's another one that goes along with it, which is, I can see several familiar names over here, people who've taken classes with me. And if you've taken a class with me, you'll know that, in fact, one of the things that I don't do is the history of art. So what I like to do, I'll talk about ancient art, and I'll talk about, say, even, I'm just saying this as an example because it's old, you know, ancient Hindu art or ancient Egyptian art, but I do that without talking about history. And there's a reason that I do that, right? Which is almost always in any book that you read, in any lecture that you'll hear, people always say, in order to understand the art, you have to understand the context. And to understand the context, that means before I start talking about ancient Egyptian art, I have to tell you about ancient Egypt, right? And this will be the same, you know, I'm going to be doing the course on Buddhist art, and usually a Buddhist art course will start with, before I talk about the art, I need to tell you about the historical context. I need to tell you about the religion or about what was happening 2000 years ago. And I always find myself objecting to that, if I can put it that way, right? I never do that. I never start with context. And the reason for that is what I believe about pictures, if I can put it this way. People always think that you need, actually, so no, that's my second proposition, right? First proposition was people get a glazed look. First proposition, people get a glazed look. Second proposition was you need to understand the context. And this allows me to come to my third proposition now, which is art in and of itself, if you look at it carefully, is telling you a whole lot of things that you don't actually need to know the context about. Let me explain what I mean by that. What we're always looking for, art is difficult, right? No matter what you're looking at, art is difficult. It can, especially contemporary art, abstract art, can be very difficult to get a grip on. And people think, and people are always trying to understand art, right? So what does understand art mean? It means I have a story through which I can approach the art. And history or context seems to promise a story, right? It says, oh, this and this and this was happening in the society, A, B, C, D, E, F was happening in society. And once you understand the society, you can see some of that coming through in the art. And what you're doing when you're doing that is you're saying, here's this big story about context and history, and here's the thing called art, and I'm going to show you how those things come to rest in art, right? So you start outside and then you go into the art. My approach to art is always the other way around, which is you start from the art. Now, I know that sounds strange, but you start from the art and you see what you can work out just by looking, right? And if you've done any classes with me, you'll know that it is incredible how much you can work out just by looking. And by looking, I mean, so I'll take as an easy example, if you've got figures, if you've got people, just see how they're interacting, see what they're doing, see what they're talking about. There's a story being told before you need the context. And almost always, you can work out what that story is. And especially, as I say, if it's good art, the better the art is, the easier it is to work it out. So I always think that you should be starting from the story itself. And the story itself will tell you the context, right? So this is my fundamental approach. It's not the outside-in approach, it's the inside-out approach. And as I said, I think the reason people find that difficult is because they're looking for the cause outside of the art. What I'm looking for is the cause inside the art. And the cause, in a sense, the art should tell you its own cause. It should explain to you itself what it's a story about. Hope this is not too obscure. I hope this is making sense. Which allows me to get to now my fourth proposition.
Yes.
Which is, so now I'm going to get just a little bit technical, right? Which is, if I'm looking at a work of art that I'm not familiar with, and say it's, actually, Sonali, can you do the screen share now? If you can put us back.
Yeah, I'll just share.
On that picture. Okay. And can you just scroll down? Is it possible to scroll down so we can just see the picture? Or is that as far as we can go?
I can zoom in, but just a minute.
Yeah, okay. So let's say we're looking at this picture down at the, on the bottom half of the screen over here, right? Now, you don't know. There we go. That's what I wanted to. I can tell you that this is a work of contemporary art, right? In which case it gets really interesting. There's all kinds of horizontals that are happening here. There are figures interspersed in between, some kind of modular structure, right? I could say that there's some kind of digital aspect happening in relation to this. Everything's laid out in this very clear way, right? This could be contemporary. It could be a work of absolutely contemporary art, or it could be a work that is 1,200 years old, right? If you look closely, and you can't quite see, it's a little bit out of focus as you look at that, you can see figures, small little figures doing strange things. I could tell you anything about this, right? We could start from the proposition. If I start from the proposition that it's a contemporary piece, and then I say, let's have a discussion, we'll get a long way talking about how this is contemporary. But if I stop there, and then I also say, this really is, which is the truth that I'm going to tell you now, this is actually a staircase. I've taken a picture of a staircase of an ancient Buddhist monument from around the 8th century. And we can have this whole long discussion about how it relates to Buddhist concepts, right? What I'm saying is, no matter what point you get into it, it will tell you a story if you let it. That's my point. And to come now to my fifth or sixth proposition, my experience when I'm looking at these things, okay, now it's easy on the one hand, I know this stuff, right? But when I understand something like this, and it is an ancient work of sculpture, right? And this is what I'm trying to work through, that I was beginning to work through with Sonali in the discussion. When I look at something like this, when I understand it, I'm not understanding it as something that was done 1,200 years ago. My understanding of it is absolutely now. I'm understanding how it operates for me now. And that's what I mean. As I was saying to Sonali, it makes no difference to me whether this was done now, or this was done yesterday, or this was done 1,000 years ago. It's all operating for me in my apprehension and in my comprehension as all part of the continuous present. And it's all part of the continuous present, not because of history, but the opposite. It's not because of history, not because of history, because it's all operating in a particular way in my understanding. And that's what I mean by this, when I'm saying, when you understand something, that understanding is all happening as a continuous present. It doesn't make any difference when this was done. It's all happening in, and then I used the word in the title, the deep present. So the deep present is, if I can put it this way, the deep present is the way in which our unconscious operates, if I can use that term using some psychoanalytic terminology. I know a lot of you are familiar with that. Our unconscious, in our unconscious, there is no history. There is no past. It's all operating in the same way in terms of how we are perceiving these objects and what they mean to us. So that's what I mean by the deep present. We have access in the present to all of these things. We have access to the whole history of art, to the whole history of everything, without it necessarily being categorized as something that's happening in the past. Let me just pause there for a second and let me see if anybody's got any comments they want to make. Sonali, can we take this down? Stop the screen share for a second.
Yes. Also, just a quick on how the format for this. If you have a question or anything, you can put it on the chat box, but we encourage you to rather use the raise hand function, and then we can unmute you and you can mention if you have a question or a statement as you prefer. So if I think Mal PC,
Yeah, sorry.
you're raising your hand, but go
I
ahead.
couldn't find the raise hand button suddenly. Rico, thank you so much. My immediate question to this is, how do I know if my reading of it is correct? What if I've totally made up something which is not at all associating to what could possibly be its real intention, if there is one?
Okay, so that's great. Now I've got two ways to answer, right? One of them is a little bit lighthearted, although it's probably more, that lighthearted response I'm going to give you is better than the serious response that I'm going to give you, which is, okay, so you're wrong. What's the tragedy that you've made something up and you're wrong? Right? What's at stake in being wrong? There's nothing that's really riding on this if you're being wrong, right? That's my first response. And what I mean by that then also is the correct, if I can put it this way, the correct response is not how things match up with history. Because in fact, part of my hypothesis in general is that, and if I can say, historians, I think most historians will agree with me, history isn't one thing, right? History is composed of a whole lot of different things, right? And as soon as we say, oh, I'm going to give you the context, what you're doing is you're forcing this visual material to be the same as everything else you know. You're actually sort of preventing any possibility of any cracks opening within the edifice of history. And so I'm always in my classes, I'm always interested in the comment that says the comment that's wrong, right? Okay, now let's start and explore that and see if that's plausible. Does that wrong comment match with a deep reading of the image, right? If it doesn't work in relation to the image, right? If I can say to you, yeah, but that doesn't fit with this aspect of the image, then okay, then we forget about it, right? But if you've got some, let's call it deviant reading, I mean deviant in the in the best way, right? If you've got a deviant reading that somehow encapsulates everything in terms of the image, it's like, wow, that's interesting. Let's go with that. Let's see where that takes us in relation to what this visuality is doing. So now this brings me to another quick point, which is I also have this proposition in general that visuality has certain codes and modes of operation in and of itself. I think that visuality and visual forms don't do the same things as written forms. I think they don't do the same things as political forms or legal forms, right? And so that becomes the interesting question then, right? Once we're looking at images by themselves and not constraining them within this thing called context, now we started. Now we can have a conversation, right? So that's my brief answer to that. And that's so the question, just to sum that up, I don't care if you're wrong, partly because I don't know what right is. I don't know what right is in the situation. I only know, let's talk about this and discuss it and see if we can arrive at, something that's a compelling reading of this image, if that image is taken seriously as an image. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other?
We have another question, which is from Mohammad Razi. In case you want to unmute Razi at any point, please do, but I'll read out your question for now. They ask, could you elucidate on the concept of a deep present, and didn't get how the unconscious does not have a past?
Okay. So that gets me exactly to the point that I want to arrive at. Let's take a counter proposition. Let's take the other sense that I'm arguing against, right? So I'm saying we shouldn't bother about context and we shouldn't bother about history. When, say you're looking at an old image, right? When you're saying, I need to understand history, what you're doing is you're effectively saying that thing in the past is different from now, right? And I need to cut myself out from where I am right now, and I need to go as far into that other region of the past as I possibly can in order to understand this image, right? What you're doing in that is you're effectively saying that image has no relevance to me now. Does that make sense? Right? You're effectively saying, oh, I need to know all those millions of other things that were happening, and oh, and I can imagine I need to look at videos and I need to read text. Oh, and now I'll transport myself into that time, right? You're effectively saying that time is not my time. It's not now. And what I'm saying is the only place we can ever be is the present, right? The only thing we can ever understand is the present. And if I can come back to the unconscious, what I want to say about that is, so the unconscious is full of stuff, right? But the whole problem with the unconscious, if I can put it that way in Freudian terms, the whole problem with the unconscious in relation to our ordinary everyday things is the unconscious has no time because it doesn't recognize the difference between a second ago and 30 years ago, right? So if you've got some trauma that's affecting you from when you were a child, it's 30 years later, it's 40 years later. Your unconscious is still replaying that trauma as though it's happening now, right? There is no time in the unconscious. Your unconscious is made up of things that happened in relation to time, or particular events in time. But the problem with the unconscious is time doesn't make it get any less. Time doesn't make those traumas get any less. They just stay there. They stay pumping out the same things, as though there is no time, as though it's all an eternal present. And in a sense, that's my model for pictures. That's what I mean by the deep present. The unconscious is the deep present, right? It's all happening right now in a mishmash, in contradiction, in contravention with itself. That's the deep present. I also happen to have another kind of side theory that I often get into in the classes when discussing images, which is, I think one of the reasons that visuality operates in its particular way, and one of the reasons that images operate in their particular way, is they bear really strong similarities to the way in which the unconscious operates. And I will just say this, so this is for people who know something about this. You'll know that one of the things that Freud says about the unconscious is there is no in the unconscious, right? There's no negation in the unconscious. The unconscious has no way to represent no for itself. Think about pictures. How do you put no into a picture, right? If you want to say no cigarettes, what you got to do is you've got to put a cigarette and then a big round circle with a thing through it. That's not a picture. The round circle with a line is not a picture. That's just, that's a code. It's like somebody yelling no at you. If you don't have those crude things or you have to write in words, right? You have to put a big thing that says no. If you don't use those crude symbolic signs that everybody knows, how do you say no in a picture, right? The problem of no in the unconscious is the same as no in a picture. And that is the deep present, right? And so this is what I'm getting at when I'm saying, if I'm looking at a picture that's a long time ago, this is what I'm saying when I'm saying my understanding of it is now. If it's touching me, it's touching me now in the deep present. It's not touching me because it was done and it meant something politically a long time ago. That picture that we just had up, right? If it's something, if it's speaking to you in some way, it's speaking to you now. It's speaking to who you are now. And it's speaking to your, and you are the accumulation of all of those things that have happened spread out in time, in which time has no meaning. It's all just a jumble of things that are in there and which you're kind of connecting with. That's the deep present. That's what I mean by the deep present. Sonali, I'm not going to go into the chats, but I saw that somebody had written something for a second.
No, that was just Muhammad Razi saying that you spoke very lucidly and thank you. So you answered.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know if anybody else has questions, please continue to, as we talk, raise your hand or put yourself in the chat box. Oh, we have a question from Payal Arya. Please unmute.
Hello. Yeah. Hi. So
Hi.
I just had one question. If we are, I agree that we are seeing it within the present and we are seeing it through this particular moment in time. However, doesn't the context and the context of the past, isn't that important within what we are seeing? The context of where it is situated to be seen within today's time. But yeah, if you could talk
Right.
about.
Yes. So my answer to that is yes and no, if I can put it that way, right? Which is, if you're interested in the past, right? If you're interested in the past, then use this and look into the past. If you want to know something about what happened 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, right? I have to say, so this is partly what I'm saying. I'm not that interested in what happened 1,000 years ago. What I'm interested in, because I'm not interested in the past in that historical sense, right? What I'm interested in is, what are these things that are being produced that mean something to me in this deep sense of being, we can be humanist about this, that seem to address us in our psychic human condition, right? That's what interests me. So from that point of view, I don't care whether it was done in Egypt or whether it was done in India. I don't care whether it was done 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago. I'm only interested in what it's saying about these issues that are kind of boiling for me now, right? Now, if you happen to like ancient Egypt, fine, go ahead and do that, right? But so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get away from this idea of correctness of the image. There is no, there are some things that are true, there are some things that are false, but that doesn't matter. That's why when I started off, when my first response, what I was saying was, it doesn't matter if you're wrong, right? It doesn't matter if I find something in an image from 1,000 years ago, and then somebody from, some ancient Egyptian historian comes to me and says, oh, I know they would never have thought like that. Then I say, maybe, but maybe they did, and you just haven't looked at the pictures enough, right? So I'm getting away from this kind of rigidity. It's all up for grabs. It's all up for grabs, and it's just a matter of, let's just look at it long and hard and work out what's going on in there. And you'll be surprised at how many things are in there that are not accessible through other means of getting at the picture. So I don't know if I said this before, but as far as I'm concerned, history is a way of limiting what the image does. Context is a way of not understanding what the picture is really doing. Does that make sense? Right? It's a way of saying, oh, it belongs in the past, and the past is weird and people are weird, so it somehow doesn't have any relevance to us. Because as soon as you start thinking about history and context, you inevitably just go into that world, and you kind of leave behind. And then suddenly somehow the image is just like a symptom of those other things that have been happening in the past. Whereas what I'm really interested in is I'm interested in the symptom, in a sense. I'm not interested in the truth. Is this true in historical terms? Is it not true in historical terms? You know, I have great respect for that. And if other people want to do that, that's fine. I'm not saying that what they're doing is wrong. I'm just saying within this particular way of thinking about images and what images can do, I think context is one sure way to avoid knowing what a picture is about. And if I can say that another way, so I'll stay with the psychoanalysis for a moment. What I'm interested in is the way in which images investigate something that's happening in the unconscious, right? If it's done well, now not all images do that, right? I'm not saying all images do that, but a lot of them do. And if that's working, it will probably work for me now as well as it worked for somebody 2,000 years ago. And I don't need, the one thing that I know for sure is context is not going to tell me about what's happening in relation to that image's exploration of the unconscious. Yeah. If you want to follow up or anybody else has something to say.
I don't know. Payal, do you want to follow up? Otherwise, Mal has a question.
Payal, you want to go?
No, go ahead.
And because then it would be the same way even then for a contemporary art piece, even let's say when you enter, I'm asking this as a like these entry exhibition wall panel text that to tell you where the artist is coming from, what they're doing, how they're making, all of that. Can I bypass that and still go ahead and go and make my reading? Is that still a valid reading?
I would absolutely encourage you, and I will tell you, I can tell my students around the world because my students are the ones who never read the wall text.
Okay.
The one thing I can promise you is the wall text is not telling you anything about the image, right? In fact, you might use it. I'm being a little bit contrarian here. You might say, I'm going to read the wall text and then do the opposite.
Okay.
This is a contemporary artist. No, let's imagine that this is an ancient Egyptian artist. Okay. And she's really interested in the way in which people talk about economics. It's like the one thing she's not talking about is economics, right? You have to read all of the written text as denials, right? Of what the image is really about. If the image is any good, that's my fundamental principle. If the image is any good, it's probably not about any of the things that people are saying. And in that respect, now you see also what I'm saying about the deep present. It's irrelevant when it was done. Doesn't make any difference when it was done, right? Paradoxically, you might end up learning something about the time if you really get into the heart of the image. But really, that's not the goal. My goal is, I live in the present. I'm not inquiring about the present through the image. Now, you can. I'm not saying you shouldn't, right? But I'm saying that that's a secondary issue in relation to what I think the image is doing.
Thank you.
Rico, we have another question from Satya. She's asking, could you please talk about the aesthetic of the image from psychoanalytic terms? Is there a good or bad image? Is there anything called beautiful versus ugly?
I'm not sure about beautiful and ugly. Let's leave that aside for a second. But for sure, there is. I don't want to offend anybody. You said, is there a good image or a bad image? Was that the term, Sonali?
Yes.
You're right. I don't want to offend anybody, but can I say, I think about images that are, for me, a good image is kind of like a clever image, a smart image, one that's thinking about things that I can enter into and really kind of expand and pull apart and see it as a deep philosophical statement. That's a good image. As far as I'm concerned, a bad image is a I'm using a word, I don't want to offend anybody, anything. A bad image is a stupid image, right? And stupid, I'm using in a particular sense. Stupid, we use that as an insult. Oh, you're so stupid, right? But it comes from the same English root as the word stupor, S-T-U-P-O-R, right? Which is a stupor is if you, some drugs can cause you to kind of fall into almost like a sleepy state where you can't use your brain, right?
Is it
That's
kind
a
of
stupor, right?
lazy?
It's sort of, people, you'll say, oh, someone in a drunken stupor. That means they're so drunk, they can't think straight, right? They're saying silly things. They're just not putting together, some intelligent way of thinking. And I mean stupid in that particular sense, right? So there are images that are just not thinking. They're either not thinking or they're thinking in a bad way, if I can put it that way. They're just not thinking in a smart, intelligent way. They're repeating cliches. That's a great way to be a bad image, right? It's just to repeat the same conventional wisdom that everybody else is saying. So for me, that's what I think of as being, a good image and a bad image, right? So a good image is one that's really investigating something from the bottom up. That's what I mean, from the inside out, right? Not from the top down. I'm hoping as I talk about this, that those of you who have taken classes with me, this is ringing some bells, right? You will know that we've seen images that do that, right? That do this deep thinking from the inside out. There are other images that are just repeating things, conventional wisdom, things that it's easy to say because everybody loves them. That's a stupid image because it's not saying anything. That's what I mean by a dumb image in that particular sense. Somebody said, oh, yeah, sorry, that initial question was then, what's the role of aesthetics? So to me, aesthetics is the visual form when all of the different elements that are in activation within the story are kind of locked in and work together. That's aesthetics. So for me, aesthetics is essentially metaphysics, right? It's kind of when everything locks in and locks together, even though that lock-in may be disorganized or it may be chaotic, or it may be, I'm not saying it has to be clean and beautifully polished. That could be the sign of a stupid image, of a dumb image, right? Where everything is clean and polished and there's nothing that's inside there. So aesthetics, in my sense, what makes a beautiful image is when all of the angles, when all of the aspects kind of lock in and come together. It's funny, I was just teaching a class this morning and I was dealing with an early Picasso painting, the Demoiselle d'Avignon. Some of you may know it, right? One of the very early, deep, modernist, abstract works. Most people who look at this find it incredibly ugly, right? Most people who look at it without knowing anything about it find it incredibly ugly. And they think that it's just, and even though they may know something about it, they can't get beyond the ugliness of it, right? So it seems to have no aesthetics. At the end of a 2-hour discussion, I was talking about this morning. At the end of a 2-hour discussion, nobody is seeing it as ugly anymore, right? Because it's what you thought of as being its ugliness, which is its kind of jarring, angular quality. Once you, and I did this whole analysis without any context, right? We just looked at the picture and worked out things from the picture. Once you see that all, then you begin to see that. Now, I'm not saying functional in any big sense. I'm just saying it's kind of coherent within the whole thing. It all kind of slots together. And the people in class were saying, the part of it that I found disturbing is just not relevant anymore, right? I was looking at this, but now we actually see that the painting is about this. And within that, the question of, is it pretty, is it not pretty, or the color's pretty or not pretty, is irrelevant because there's this other sense that's happening. And to me, that's where aesthetics lies. Aesthetics lies in that metaphysical investigation of it's the totality of the whole thing in its visual form. That to me is what aesthetics is about. Does that make sense?
Yes. We have one question from Saima, where she writes, Orhan Pamuk said good museums convert time into space. What does this entail?
That's great. Yeah, you know, I haven't read a lot of Orhan Pamuk, I confess, but every now and again somebody comes out with a good thing like that, and I stop and I say, it's like, wow, yeah, that's good. And I think he's talking along a similar track, which is why I think you're putting this question in, right? Which is, so, and if I can elaborate that, the way I would kind of spin what Orhan Pamuk is saying, a good museum is converting long time into this space, right? Space is an interesting topic, right? And I don't think he means space as it's spread out between Tokyo and London. I think he means the space that you're in now. That's what I'm talking about as the deep present, right? The deep present is this moment that I am in now, which is composed of all of those layers of things. All of those things, some of which come from now, some of which come from the past. We're all in this space together. And that's that. And when I say all, I don't mean all of us, the people I'm talking to. I'm saying me and all of the things that are there. We're all in the simultaneous present, this continuous present together, irrespective of where it came from. I think that's what that means. Does that make sense? The person who actually said the quote?
I think yes. In the meantime, till she replies, Arshi has her hand raised. Do you want to unmute?
Hi, yeah. I just wanted to circle back to what you were discussing before about how, not to read the text with the painting or with the artwork or the picture,
Yeah.
basically. So I think what I'm trying to ask is more about the essence then of the picture. A lot of times the interpretation or, this sort of idea behind that picture is given by the artist over there, why they made that particular picture, what they think about the picture. But then, of course, obviously, since everything is subjective, our interpretation without that text would be different if we did not read that text, which is, I guess, what you were getting at. But then what is the essence then of the picture? Is it what I interpret, or is it what the artist wants you to interpret?
Right. So I've got a slightly long answer to that one, which is so I've got a lot of friends who are artists, right? And when I go around to see their work, especially the ones who I've just met, or say if I'm dealing with students, right? I go to a crit where there are some young students, and I go and I stand in front of the work, and they want to start telling me what it's about. It's usually the professor is saying to them, tell the guest professor what it is that's about. And I do the same for them as I do with people in front of a wall text. I say, don't tell me, let me work it out, right? And so part of this is, if I can work it out, if I can't work it out, I'm being a little bit arrogant here. I'm being very arrogant when I'm saying this. If I can't work out what's going on, then it's probably not such a good painting, right? It's probably not such a good artwork. I've been around a long time. I can get my way through a lot. Now, I'm not saying I understand everything, but especially if there's a student who's just starting out, part of your job is to let me, as a sophisticated viewer, and as you all are, as sophisticated viewers, you should be able to work it out, right? This is a little sideline I'm going on over here. I just want to say, a lot of people, if you go into a museum or you go into an art show and there's a lot of artwork that you don't understand, you should be thinking to yourself, it's not my fault, it's their fault, right? You're the audience. It should be relatively clear to you. If you can't work it out and you've made a good effort, you deserve to work that out. Maybe it's, instead of thinking I'm stupid, you should be thinking maybe it's not such a good artwork, right? I just want to say that as a possibility. So now let me come back to this with my friends. And remind me, once I finish this, I'm going to talk about the unconscious, okay, so that I don't forget. When I go and I have a look at an artwork of one of my friends and they don't tell me what it's about, I'll work my way through it and we'll have a discussion, and I'll say, so I think it's about A, B, C, D, E. And sometimes the artist will say, yeah, that's very close to what I was thinking. But it's amazing how often it happens that one of my friends will say, that was the furthest thing from my mind when I was doing this work. But now that you're saying it, yeah, you know, maybe you're right. And when they're saying maybe you're right, they're not saying maybe that's what it's about, but maybe what you're saying works in relation to this. Maybe there was something like this that's happening inside my mind. And this relates to where I'm going with this in the unconscious. The point about the unconscious is it's unconscious, right? And so much of what we do, now on the one hand, we like to say, oh, you know, a good artwork is exploring the unconscious. It's incredibly difficult to do that, right? It's incredibly difficult to do that deliberately. But the unconscious can do such unbelievable things. I'm going to give you a really trivial example. The other day, I was, I don't know, I think I was getting dressed. I was putting on a shirt and I was doing up the shirt button. And then suddenly the button popped off the shirt that I was wearing. And it bounced on the table and it hit something. I think it hit a pen that hit something else. And then suddenly something else that was on the desk sort of bounced up and landed inside a glass, right? You know, one of those weird things, something bumps something, something bumps something, and then suddenly something happens at the end. And it was one of those things where suddenly the something that was on the desk ended up inside a glass. And my first thought was, wow, you know, that's crazy. That's, you know, that's the stuff that happens. You know, if you tried to repeat that, you couldn't do that. And then I thought to myself, you know, I work in psychoanalysis. That's the unconscious. The unconscious does things like that. If I try to do that, it couldn't happen. But if you let it happen by itself, it will do that by itself. This is the fundamental concept of what Freud's talking about in parapraxy, slips of the tongue, right? Or slips of the things where you do something and something happens and then suddenly you've pushed the cat off the roof, right? And I was like, oh, I didn't mean to push the cat off the roof. It's like somewhere in your unconscious, you meant to push the cat off the roof, right? So you've got to be serious about this. And in some ways, exploring art inside the image is doing that. You know, this is what I'm saying, where the text is your conscious. Your text is within the dream work. The text is your consciousness that's disguising what's happening, right? So now, if this is true, if what I'm saying is true, the last person you should be asking about what the artwork means is the artist. If the artwork is any good, the artist knows very little about it. And in a sense, the artist is just another, at the end of the process of having created something, the artist is just another interpreter, just like you are. The artist has no priority in interpretation. They're just looking at the work. They don't know what it means either, right? They're looking at it and they're thinking about it. And I know a lot of artists, the ones who I respect the most, who have this process of kind of rediscovering their own work. Part of that's really what's satisfying for most of them about this is not that they've done it and, oh, now I've done it, I can forget about it, but it's the opposite. Now I've done it. Now I can look at it and read it again and again and find out something deeper inside it. So that's this kind of strange inversion that happens once you get into this particular sense. So again, I'm trying to get you away from this idea that what the artist thinks is the truth, right? There is no truth of this, right? And especially not from the artist is what I want to say. The truth, as far as I'm concerned, is I don't even know if I want to use the word the truth, but just going that the truth is there a convincing argument that's being made in discussion, in my thinking? Can I see that the image is making a convincing argument about this one thing? Then I'm happy to say that that's the truth. But then if you come along to me tomorrow and you say, oh, look, I've got this completely different reading of it, and you make another convincing reading going in another direction, then that's all great. As far as I'm concerned, that's fine. It doesn't matter if you're wrong. Wrong is irrelevant in relation to art, is what I want to say. Yeah, so coming back, it can you can be good and you can be bad in relation to art. You can do a good reading or you can do a bad reading, but that's completely different from doing a true reading or a false reading.
I have a question, Rico. See, we are also alongside this. I'm so happy you're saying this. I'm getting excited now. But see, while this is happening, while you're talking about this, and now my curiosity speaks, we're also doing something. Many of us are also part of other Bikar courses as artists, trying in the process of trying to articulate what this process is about, in order to communicate with a third party, so that our, to find footing to make our work proceed in the so-called larger world market, everything else, Now here it is that we are again, we are put back along after admitting as an artist, saying, I don't know what this is about. I am trying to discover, I am trying to learn. Then here we are put back in the position of attempting again to straitjacket certain things in some manner, knowing fully well that it's a connection that I'm desperately trying to forge in order to communicate with somebody else, which may really not even hit the nail on the head, but I'm so far away from what I consider my sort of this ocean of truth, and I'm trying to pick one pebble and give it to somebody saying this is what it's about.
Yes.
And I feel
Yes.
so short-handed in that process, but it seems to be necessary to do that as well. So can you talk a little bit about this gap that I'm trying to bridge, which need not be built, but needs to be built?
Yes, yes. I understand that. And that's a great, that's a great way of thinking about what this problematic entails here, right? So what I can say is, so within this kind of mishmash, let's say you're an artist starting out, right? And you're saying, I'm thinking about this. And this is the issue that I want to explore, right? What I'm saying is, so now that depends where you're coming from, right? If you're starting from a kind of moment of insight, right? I will say this, let me say this. If you're starting off from a proposition that everybody knows, it's not good to be nasty, right? Everybody should be nice to each other, right? Now that's something that everybody agrees with, right? So if you're going to operate on that level of, oh, it's good to be kind, it's good to be kind, it's good to be kind, you're probably not going to produce a particularly good work, right? If you ask yourself the question, what does it mean to be kind, right? What does it mean for me to be kind, right? What are the obstacles in me in being kind, right? What are the things that work against that, right? If you start along that path and then you are attentive to if you're attentive to what you're doing, and what you're doing is telling you about what you're thinking, right? I'm sort of trying to get, so as far as I'm concerned, it's an interesting point. I know if you're taking courses with Rohit, I'm not sure where he would stand on this. So in a sense, you have to kind of relinquish that conscious control, because your unconscious is doing its work.
Yeah.
Right? And then once you're doing that, if you're on that path and you are kind of arriving at something that you're happy with as a depth point, like it's the deep present that I'm talking about, right? And if you have managed, if you can think, now there's another point in creating art, right? Which is, I think you're absolutely right, which is what I was saying about you've got to get this across to the observer in some way, right? So it's got to be something that's legible. You've got to have them, the third party, in mind in terms of that. If you've managed to do everything there, if you've managed to tie all of the loose ends together so that it's still faithful to what you're discovering about yourself as you're doing this, right? And if there are things in there that you can imagine that other people can have access to in relation to this. So it's a multi-layered process, right? I mean, on the one hand, the core of it is getting your unconscious to speak, right? Getting to explore your unconscious. But then it doesn't just end there, right? You've then got to think about, in a more sort of orderly, rational way, how do I structure that in a way so that other people can see that? Now, I'm not saying this is not a law, what I'm going to say to you. This is just a feeling that I have, right? Is once you think that you've wrapped things up in this particular way, right? That's what I was talking about with aesthetics. Once you feel that you've wrapped that up, you've reached the end, right? You need to feel that you've reached the end of this particular path of exploration. And then once you have that, once that's out there, then it's sort of ready, that artwork, if I can put it this way, that artwork is ready to be encountered by other good faith actors, let's put it that way, right? And then some of them may get what you're talking about, but then some of them may get something else that you didn't know you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
So if I can put it this way, for you as an artist, and I actually don't usually think this way, so I'm kind of working it out as I'm talking to you. I would say for you as an artist, it's a successful work when 25 different people can give you 25 different interpretations, every one of which is true to you.
Yeah.
Right? That's when it's worked. Right?
Yeah.
That's why. So that's what I'm saying is like you at a certain position, you switch from being the creator to being the interpreter, to being the reader. And that's when it operates, is when all of those things, because if you're, and this is what I'm getting at in relation to the unconscious, if you are exploring the unconscious in one particular way, right? Your conscious resistance is never far away. So your conscious resistance is always working in some particular way. You know, that's part of how this comes out. But if you are somehow managing to stay in tune with or in resonance with this unconscious proposition that you're working with, it should still be there for others to access, even though you may not quite have realized it. Right?
Yeah.
So it will still be there as a thing, even though you're not quite sure about what that is, but then maybe in time you will see that, and you will see that as it's kind of mirrored back to you by the other people who are looking at it. Now I'm just working this out as we're talking, so you know I'm not sure how.
No, this is definitely, I think, for most artists, this is the hope, right? That here
Yeah.
it is. I have tried to work out something, and in presenting it to you and others, help me build my understanding better, so that I can, it is a collective. It is developing something, putting it out there, and then the collective starts not just stating what it understands. It also just, it throws, like many times it even just throws these phrases and half images at you that you are kind of just pulling into yourself to piece together in some sense.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can, and then so part of your job then also is, as these other things are coming back to you, right? If there are some things that are coming back to you that other people are saying that are being reflected back to you that you just think are, that you really dislike or you think are wrong, right? Are wrong in relation to what you were trying to do, what you thought you were doing. And if you also don't like them, right? If you like them, that's great. Then you're happy with them. But if they're consistently coming back, then at that point you need to kind of stop and go back into the work and say, what turning did I take that's showing this face to those people? Which I think is not quite in resonance with what the other thing that I think I'm trying to do. And then you've got to adjust, right? You've got to work that out.
Yeah.
And it's this constant backwards and forwards, this coming and going, that until you get to the point where, you know, where most of the kind of resonances that are coming back are working in a way that somehow seems plausible to you, not in terms of what's right, but in terms of what resonates with you now.
Yeah.
So I think that's the way to think about it.
But if we write this as this is truly something that we will be able to carry to our grave, you know, as the central truth.
Yeah.
But if this is how forget if this is how it's the longest time, like when I present it like this, there still needs to be a story, there still needs to be a context, there still needs to be all the things that we are trying to say, leave for now. It seems to be what validates the work in a context where the story seems to need to sell the art and not the other way around.
And so, you know, the only thing that I can say about that is you got to change that.
Okay.
Right. That's the only thing that I can say about this. So now, so I'll tell you this in the same way that you're saying this. I've got, you know, a lot of friends who teach at universities, right? And one of the things about art schools, right? One of the things that the modern art school does, let's just go back a little bit in time, right? You know, in traditional workshop practices hundreds of years ago, no one spoke about art, right? There was the master and you came in as an apprentice and you learned to do from watching the master, right? And nobody asked you to say anything about this, right? But now one of the things that's happened in our fractured modern art education system, and I'm not blaming it, I'm not saying, oh, it shouldn't be fractured. You know, I love that. I think that's great, right? But one of the things that people think about is you do what you do. And one of the jobs of art school is to teach you to talk about what you're doing, right? And I actually think that's, yeah, I think that's a disservice, right? But that's the way the art world works. The way the art world works is you've got to be able to say good things. I will say, and I'll say this with, you know, my friend Rohit and some other friends of mine, one of the things we're always laughing about is, you know, really clever text, really bad art.
Yeah.
Right? So many artists are saying, and I've disrupted the paradigms, and I've instituted a whole new radical way of looking at things. And it's like, wow, that'll be great, you know. And then you look at the art, and it just doesn't do that, right? So this is what I'm saying. If I'm consulting with people and I'm talking to artists, I'm saying, just don't worry about the words, right? I mean, that's to make good art. But it's very difficult. You know, the modern art world is a difficult place, and it's got its rules and it's got its setup. And you've just got to try and negotiate that. You've got to do your best. And I will tell you this. I can't remember who I was talking to. I was writing an application. Writing an application for some funding with another group of professors. And we're supposed to be joining in with another group that's up and running, whose fundamental principles I disagree with, right? There's this other group that's got a lot of money, and they just, you know, they're saying something that's just the whole approach I just think is nonsense, right? But I'm, you know, pragmatic, and we're trying to get some money for us and for the students and that kind of thing. And so my colleague said to me, after I was making a big fuss and I was saying, oh God, that's terrible, I hate that whole approach, it's completely wrong. My friend said to me, you know what, you write the application, right? And because you seem to have thought most about it. And then I thought to myself, and I said, you know, that's right, because I've got to write up the application and I have to try and make it seem like we can be linked in with them in a way where I'm not telling any lies. So what I've got to do is I've got to write something where I'm not lying, right? I don't have to tell the whole truth in this particular respect. I don't have to say, so I've got to find a thing that I can live with, that they can live with, right? And that's the negotiation, right? Can you get as far as you can without lying terribly, right? That's part of the job. And honestly, nobody can really teach you that, right? That's just experience. That's just, can you make it, you know, they've got their set of demands, you've got your set of demands. Can you make it work so that you're not giving in to them completely, but you're giving them enough? And, you know, honestly, I do think pretty much everybody involved in the art world is authentic. They're genuine. Everybody loves art, right? So just say something that can work with them, right? Give them something that they can latch onto and think, that's interesting, right? I can live with that. I can work with that. That's just, you know, you just got to try that.
Thank you.
Also, Rico, sorry, just to cut in, there's a question on the chat. From Ritika Shah, if you'd like to unmute, please do. Does encountering the context necessarily imply the bypassing of the present, working with the conscious as necessarily not working with the unconscious? Couldn't the deep present be arrived precisely by encountering both historical depth and the subjective response to it? And what is it that we hope to achieve through reading in this way?
So that's a profound question. And I kind of want to say yes, right? So that proposition, Sonai, can you read that again? Doesn't the deep present is...
Sorry, I think she's just talking about like how you mentioned about the sequence, that the context shouldn't come first. Does that mean that you negate the context completely and it's not sort of part of the deep present or the process of laboring towards making sense of this image?
Oh, hang on a second, because I was thinking, are you saying this is the person who's writing? Are they asking that as
Yes,
an artist
I can-
creator or as someone who's looking at an artwork? Because
I'm
those are
not-
two different positions.
I'm not sure because Ritika, if you could put it on the chat or unmute, that would help us.
Yeah,
Oh,
Ritika, if you want to.
are you able to unmute?
But
Ah, thank
I'm
you.
not sure which part is not clear.
I
I think in a way this is precisely my question, that I think we're mixing a few areas such as the relation between, for example, the analyst and the analysand, the artist and the reader of the art. And when I ask this question of what is it that we hope to achieve through reading in this way, so of course, if you're working in the domain of the clinic, then perhaps yes, something could be. And if you're just trying to work with the unconscious, then that's a different area than just looking at an art. And the other thing that I meant by working both, which could also be true in the clinic. You could work with the collective history or something of like history of thought, and yet encounter new things about yourself, or some degree of trauma could become evident only once you look at historical movements of thoughts, right? And which is then I was transposing that to looking at an image, that you could look at understand the history of the image, and of course temporality of the sequencing is important, but at the same time still have a subjective response to it. And if you I'm just uncomfortable with this idea that encountering history or context would necessarily imply that you would bypass the unconscious, or this is what my question sort of was implying yet, but I'm also thinking out loud. Thank you.
Yeah, so what I'm saying, and then I have to say, everything that I'm saying in a kind of the mode of the speculative, right? I'm not saying these are absolute truths in any way. So what I'm saying is, in general, when people get into context, the more they're into context, once you start with context, the further you go into context. I don't know anybody who's looking at context who says, oh, I've read 3 paragraphs, that's enough, right? You read 3 paragraphs, oh, that's interesting, let me investigate this, let me investigate that, let me think about that. And so it ends up blossoming into this huge big thing that just inevitably pulls you further and further away from your kind of deep encounter with the artwork. So that's what I'm saying. That's part of what the problem with the context is. I will also say this, which is, I actually, I want to come back to the clinic, the analysand in the clinic, right? There's this great phrase that Freud uses when he's talking about dreams. And he says, dreams are composed of these deep, unconscious drives and elements that are coming out. And they they latch onto what he calls the remains of the day. Right? And the remains of the day are the tiny little insignificant things that happened today. I dropped my pen on the floor, right? I opened the fridge and I saw a red tomato, right? Completely irrelevant things that just somehow register within your perceptual apparatus. And the dream is the signifiers hook onto each other, in a sense, right? And the reason that I'm saying this is the remains of the day in the dream example are the context that, let's say, the artist is working with, right? So the artist, if you're an artist and you're going into this, right, you're going in through this context, which is, there's something that's happening now. There's some political issue that I don't like, right? There's something that's happening that's really burning me up that I don't like, right? That's the remain of the day that in the kind of art that I'm looking for, if I can put it that way, serves as the starting point in which you then whoops.
Sorry, Rico, I think there was just some background noise, please.
Right. Okay. So that's the kind of entry point into which you go down into this quest within the unconscious that I'm talking about, right? So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying in its minute form that there is no such thing as context. What I'm arguing against is this big picture of, oh, we need to go in and investigate the context before we get to the art. I will tell you, look at any art book, any single art book that's written about art, especially the big surveys, they never start with the art. They always start with an explanation of In the ancient Near East, in Samaria, they did this. In the Indus Valley, they did that. In Latin America, they did this. And you've got 3 pages of general stuff. And the king said this, and then the king said that before you get to the art. That's the main thing that I'm moving against. Those of you who've actually done classes with me and done this, you know that by the time you've come to the end of this reading that I'm advocating, you've arrived back at those remains of the day. So you've arrived back at those contextual points, but now you've come back to them not as history, right? Not as something that happened as history, but as elements that are kind of psychic elements that are the hooks around which everything else works. And in that case, they're not really, you know, they're important not as context, they're important as elements within that chain of signifiers that makes up the artwork. Does that make any sense? Is that
Yes, I'm thinking about it, but thank you. This has clarified.
right? So that's my way of thinking about it. Yeah, indeed. But so I'm in a sense I'm agreeing with you in your big large picture, right? So the deep present is the place where you encounter the past, except you don't encounter it as a past. You encounter it as part of the simultaneous thing, which is you. If I can put it that way. Right? And
Yes,
you know,
I
if
see.
I can say this, so I'm just thinking this through, you know, even within the experience of analysis, right? When you're in psychoanalysis, you know, and you're the analysand. And you know, you suddenly have a recollection. Let's say you suddenly have this insight, oh, you know, such and such happened to me a long time ago, right? As you're having that recollection, the long time ago is fading into the background, right? And the recollection is the now. The event that happened a long time ago is happening in the now. That's the deep present. Right? The deep present is where, as I was saying, is all of the stuff from the past, except it's losing its character as being in the past.
Yeah.
Right? That's the point. And it's kind of rejoining this kind of whirlpool, which is what the present is all about. That's the way I'm thinking about this.
I think it's interesting when you lay this out, it becomes clear that the different movements, as opposed to this idea that whatever I say in the deep present is necessarily profound. But I think if you think of the movement, then you can see that there's a degree of training involved, which is also involved in encountering the unconscious. It's not just that one speaks and one touches the unconscious. It's that there is a function as the analysant or some dynamic of power the subject's supposed to know, or such as.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a whole, you know, I mean, I say this with a laugh, you know, the one thing that psychoanalysis does is it gives you some kind of methodology about how to hold on to the unconscious, right? It's not just, you know, Freud talks about wild psychoanalysis, right? There are these kind of moments when something crazy happens and off you go with the big, you know, so the big question within this stuff that we're talking about, this kind of overlay between psychoanalysis and art, right, is how do you hold on to the unconscious? How do you hold on to it without overlaying it with repression? And how do you just hold on to that just kind of on a, you know, you're balancing on a knife edge, trying to hold on to that unconscious stream, that unconscious track, without either suffocating it or losing track of it and it dashes off into the distance and you have nothing more to say about it, right? It's that balancing on the knife edge of what it's about that's the really difficult thing. Absolutely. Indeed.
Thank you.
I know we're slowly running out of time, but if it's okay, Rico, can we take a couple more questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Shweta, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. I have this question regarding to understanding of the art. So I wanted to ask that if at any point in time I'm not able to understand a particular kind of art, does that mean or interpret that art, does that mean that my current self is not connecting with the art?
No, I don't think that's true in a deep sense. I think that's true in a really superficial sense, right? Because I just have to say this, I've been teaching for so long. I have never had a class. I've never had students in a class where no matter what image we took from what period, right, where at the beginning, the students looked at it and said, that's just crazy, it means nothing, it's garbage, I hate it, right? Within an hour, everybody in class just loves that art. It's difficult and it's not that difficult, right? So what I would say is, if there's some piece of art that you're not connecting with, or some style or something like that, but it's somehow, you don't have to do this. I'm not saying, oh, don't, no, you owe it a duty, you have to take care of it. If it intrigues you to some extent, and it's like everybody's talking about it, it doesn't need more than an hour, right? Once you've got some experience in looking at images and understand, and thinking about art. If it's not giving anything back to you within an hour, then my response to that is it's probably not that good, right? It doesn't take a huge amount of work. It takes a huge amount of work to get deeper and deeper and deeper into it. But to get beyond that initial, I have no idea what this is about. Almost nothing will withstand an hour of intense investigation just by looking, even without going into the context, just by looking. That's my thinking about that. That makes sense?
Yeah, kind of like it may be that the attention isn't like that much to understand it. It could be that problem or the problem that you have raised.
Yeah, indeed. Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Mal, your hand is up. I don't know if anybody else has a question. If not,
I'll wait.
raise your hand. If no, but we'll conclude with you, please.
No, Rico, I think there is this huge it's a matter of how we are trained so far in our life, the way we are schooled, the way we are taught to approach subject, the way we study,
Yeah.
which is so entrenched in this thing of arriving at a meaningful meaning, and what that means when we see something, and how plausible that should be, and how many marks that answer will fit in order to get the jigsaw puzzle right. So this is what you're trying to say is both extremely freeing and makes me all the more curious, not just about it puts hope and faith back in a different way. So, thank you.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. That's honestly, on the one hand, I'm saying I really disagree with so much of the contemporary apparatus around art, right? And that includes teaching of art. There's so much in there that I just disagree with radically. But I also think it's not that difficult to fix, right? It's not that difficult it's just some small little changes here and there, just a kind of change of the way you're looking at things, and you can go off by yourself. And honestly, I think it is possible to cohabit with the, with that structure of the art world that I dislike, because that structure of the art world is much less rigid than it seems when you're trying to break into it.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody on all sides. So you're, as an artist, you're kind of like, I'm not sure. But then everybody else on the other side in the art world, the dealers, the people who are handing out scholarships, they're just as uncertain, because what they're always thinking is like, oh, maybe I'm not so hip anymore. Oh, maybe there's this cool new thing happening and I don't know about it. Oh my God, what happens if I make a mistake? They're going to think I'm so uncool, right? So everybody's involved in this game it's a game of shadows, right? Where everybody's pretending to everybody else that they know what they're doing. That's okay. That's fine. But just don't be intimidated by that, is
Yeah.
what I'm saying. And don't think that, oh, there's no way in for me. Right? And as I'm saying, I believe the way in is to do really good, serious, considered, deep, thoughtful work. That's the way in, and hopefully somebody will pick it up somewhere along the line. That's my general approach.
Yeah, Kunal, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I just wonder if while negotiating, maybe is there a way for an artist to write about their own art where they are one reading of their art amongst others? So that way, not compromising on the whole, adulterating people's understanding of things, you're not guiding any, but you've got all the material there for everyone to work with that you yourself are working through while trying to maybe, because I mean, like I work at a gallery now, and yeah, like the statements and the applications and the wall texts, and I wonder how one might do that, for their own writing without falling into the traps of context.
Yeah. So I'm laughing at that's such a great question. It's like, I got to tell you, in my heart of hearts, I'll tell you what, in my ideal world, I'm just going to say to you, like, don't write about your own art. Just don't, right? Say what you need to say in pictures, put everything into the picture. And then, I'm always deeply suspicious of people writing about their own art, right? Is there a way to write about your art as a mode of uncertainty? Right? As soon as you start saying, and I always laugh because I get so many applications and I read so many things where people saying, in this painting I did this, that, and the next thing. I did this and I overturned that paradigm, and I opened a brand new prism about something, and it's like, that's just, to me, that's not the way to write about your own art, right? Which is so one of the things that I have been saying is, and I suspect Rohit would agree with this, which is almost all good art has some core of uncertainty. That's what I mean when I'm saying it's speculative. It's like, maybe this, even the art that you might think is the most doctrinal, right? So some piece of Catholic art that's in the Vatican by the Pope, right? Even, those great works of art, inside all of that, what we think of as this deep, rigid theology and ideology, almost always there's some core of, let's think about this, right? So I think there might be a way of writing about your own art if you're going to do a wall text, where you're saying something from the position of uncertainty, not from the position, it's like, where the one thing you have to avoid at all costs for me is just don't explain your work. Whatever happens, don't explain your work, right? If you're going to explain your work, do it in the picture. Don't think, oh, I'm going to do this picture, then I'm going to do a text that will explain what happened there. It's like, that's the worst thing you can possibly do. So find some way. I do have something that I'll say that this will make maybe not so much sense. There's an expression, there's a sort of joke that was made sometime in the 1960s where somebody says, writing about art is like dancing about architecture.
Yeah.
Okay, you know that, right? Now, I think that was meant initially as a criticism, right? Where it was a kind of like, writing about art is as stupid as dancing about architecture. To which I say, the best thing you can do about architecture is dance to it, right? The best thing you can do about painting is sing to it. The best thing you can do about sculpture is write a poem about it, right? So what I'm getting at is these kind of equivalences of uncertainty. If you can get into some mode of writing where you're not thinking of writing as being this explanatory, rational mode of saying what's going on in there. If you can continue the uncertainty of the work in a piece of dance or in a piece of music or in a piece of writing, that might work. I don't know, maybe.
Thank you.
Kunal, is that you seeing where I'm going? That's all that I can say about that.
Yeah, this is giving me a lot to think about and maybe feel. So,
Yeah, great.
I have a question. Like, hi.
Hi.
Okay, there was a lot to process in the whole conversation, but I wanted to understand peculiarly from the context of a museum, because like the museums often have a tendency to decontextualize the object from where it is originated to where it ends up in a museum, where it is recontextualized within the
Sure.
space that it occupies.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
like you're speaking about like the present, like the deep present, but the deep present often has the load of the past, which is many a times violent, many a times museums have a tendency to kind of create a very beautiful aura around it, but they often come with its own violence. So then how do you read that in the context of the deep present? And also the talk kind of reminded me of the Lacanian mirror stage, because it's when you encounter the self for the first time is where the kind of sociological context built around it creates the reading out of the object. Now, like these are two conflict things happening in a space like museum where everything kind of collapses as a larger thematics. So how do you respond to this? Like,
Wow. Now that's a great question. Maybe we should do another session on that. I'm not sure. I think, what sprang to mind as you were talking, I had a friend who was an art photographer, right? So he was the guy who, when a museum, he was an international figure, right? So when one of the huge museums did a show, they would call this guy to photograph the show. And I was talking to him once. There was this huge, big exhibition about, I don't know, just took up rooms and rooms of some historical material. And we were talking about it, and he said to me, I just don't think they should do that kind of thing. They just shouldn't do that. It's just bad. It's like bad from the start to do those kinds of massive, big historical displays. And I kind of want to start off by saying, I think I would have to say, let's agree, as you phrased this, that a museum is a bad idea. It's just not a good thing. Okay. So it's tarnished from the beginning. There's no way to make a museum a good thing. Okay. Proposition 1. Proposition 2. I'm not advocating that we don't have museums because I live in museums, right? And if the choice is between losing an artwork, right, something getting damaged and disappearing forever, or putting it into a museum, for sure I want to put it into this tarred institution, which is the museum. So, it's a bad thing, but let's say that sometimes it does some good. Okay. You said it really beautifully there, where you're kind of saying often the objects have had some violent history to them, right? They're often looted, they're taken from colonial places, they've been stolen, and let's not forget that a whole lot of the artworks themselves are terrible things. They're in the service of some horrible ideology, some terrible religious doctrinaire thing, or some political ideology that's a terrible thing, right? A lot of great artworks are terrible things in political terms, right? So I would actually say, yeah, so this is a really interesting question, and we should do a longer talk about this. But I would say, let's from the proposition that it's all bad, right? And then once it's bad, where do we go? Taking into account that it's bad, where do we go from there? Right? But you're absolutely right. Making it all look pretty and beautiful, that's clearly not a good thing. But for the rest, honestly, I'm not sure. I'll have to think about that some more. I actually hadn't really been thinking about that aspect of it. So thank you for that great question.
no, thank you for your inputs. Like, it was a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, indeed.
I think those are all the questions. So Rico, on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much for your time. And in case anybody is interested, Rico's next course starts on Thursday. You can check our website for details, or if you'd like to join, keep in touch. That's
And I thank you. Can you still hear me? Because our electricity just went off. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Right. Okay. So I just want to thank everybody. I especially want to thank you, Sonali, for pulling this all together and for just a fantastic session. That was just a pleasure from beginning to end. Honestly, I really appreciate everybody's participation, and most of all, I appreciate your attention, your rapt attention. You know, when people really listen to what you're saying, that's just an extraordinary thing. So I thank you very much. Okay, great.
Thank you, Rico, and everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.